Hi, my name is Candace Aft, and I'm here today to talk to you about organizational culture, and more specifically, Edgar Schein's model and how it applies to Enron as a specific case study. To begin, we'll review organizational culture as a concept. We'll go into Edgar Schein's three-tiered model while applying it to Enron, and then we'll finish off looking at limitations to that model and how we can study organizational culture better in the future. So to begin, organizational culture as a concept was first discussed in the 1950s. It was developed after a correlation between organizational culture and organizational performance was found. So people were trying to improve their culture, and in doing so, scholars came up with these lists of what an organization should have in order to develop a better culture. These lists included things such as having strong leadership, having clearly articulated values, and having things along the lines of customer service and focusing on specific areas within the organization. Edgar Schein came out and said that these ideas were too simplistic to understand something as complex as culture, and that the lists of things that a culture should have neglect to acknowledge what a culture actually is. And so his studies tended to focus on that area. Edgar Schein defines culture as a pattern of shared basic assumptions that the group learned as it solved problems of external adaptation and internal integration that has worked well enough to be considered valid and therefore to be taught to new members as the correct way to perceive, think, and feel in relation to those problems. This definition set the foundation for understanding that culture is developed through communicative actions and not by an individual creating acts. From here, we'll look a little further into Schein's model. The three-tiered system includes artifacts, espoused values and beliefs, and underlying assumptions. In addition to the model, he has a strong focus on organizational leadership, so we'll touch on that as well. He focuses strongly on immersion as a study method as opposed to using surveys and categorizing culture. So really understanding what the culture is of an organization. To give you a little bit of background on our specific case study, Enron was developed as a merger between two natural gas companies. It was formed as an energy company, but as it expanded and diversified its portfolios, it started becoming more of a trading company as well. As a publicly traded company, they had a high trade value of over $80 per share in December of 2000, and less than a year later, they filed for bankruptcy and traded for under $1 per share. Soon after its fall, analysts believed that culture was a major contributor in its failure, and so that's why we used it in this specific case study. So the first tier in Edgar Schein's model is artifacts. So the tip of that iceberg are an organization's most visible aspects, and these include facilities, offices, any displayed awards, slogans, dress codes, how people interact with one another, things that are easy to observe, but without knowing those underlying assumptions, it's often difficult to comprehend and analyze them. Some of the artifacts at Enron included displays of opulence, using elephants and acrobats as entertainment during meetings, having luxury cars at the facilities when we had bonus days at the corporation, a rank and yank hiring and firing process that included a peer performance review where the bottom 15% of reviewees were fired each year, and a decentralized management structure that allowed people to make large decisions with little oversight. The second tier is espoused values and beliefs of an organization, and these are the stated values by leaders and founders of organizations. They can include strategic plans, core values, and if what a leader proposes works and continues to work, these values become shared assumptions. That said, sometimes the espoused values of an organization are in direct conflict with some of the underlying assumptions, which is in the case of Enron, as we'll see here in a moment. Some of the espoused values at Enron that we've seen include their formal statements of human rights principles: respect, integrity, communication, and excellence. In addition to those 4 areas, they espoused values of innovation, entrepreneurship, creativity, and an attitude of the survival of the fittest. There was a strong concentration from leadership on stock prices and short-term gains, and they also rewarded people who were creative risk takers who may have bent or broken trade rules. The 3rd tier of organizational culture is the underlying assumptions of that culture. The nature of truth and reality is understood in this area, as well as different ideas that are ingrained so deep that they're often taken for granted. These assumptions are viewed as truth within an organization and are incredibly difficult to break. Some of the underlying assumptions at Enron include the idea that human nature is motivated by greed, that wealth, power, and ambition were valued over the principles of respect, integrity, communication, and excellence that were espoused, and that communication was undermined by the political climate of peer reviews. Managers and staff would have a tendency to approve projects because they were afraid that if they had any dissent towards these projects, that their peers would review them poorly and they would lose their job. That overall restricted the flow of negative information and created a blind loyalty to the leaders in the organization. On to leadership. Schein viewed the founders and leaders as critical in developing culture. Employees will look to them to communicate the purpose, values, and assumptions of a group, and they look to them to reward different types of behavior. Within Enron's organizational leadership, we had 2 main leaders that we focused on. The first was Kenneth Lay, who is the founder of the organization, and he began the attitude of breaking rules by advocating for industry deregulation and modeling not agreeing with established rules and changing the established rules. The second leader to look at very closely is the former CEO, Jeffrey Schein, who really infused that idea of the survival of the fittest into the organization and created an atmosphere of competition within the group. Some of the challenges to Schein's model include the idea that it's oversimplistic. There are scholars out there that believe it has fully neglected certain areas, including the relationship of the symbols, rhetoric, and innovation within an organization's culture. The second challenge includes the assumption that organizations are unitarian in nature. Edgar Schein spent a lot of time talking about how organizations work together and focused a lot on the similarities, but in his initial work did not focus as much on the differences and the dissent that occurs within organizations. Also, Schein puts too much of an emphasis on the founders and leaders in the creation of culture. In doing so, he neglects the influences of managers and other employees as developing culture. So to conclude, Schein's model continues to be a relevant way in order to research and better understand organizational culture. However, this specific study did have some limitations. For example, the borders between the different levels of Schein's model were very difficult to distinguish when you're actually looking at a specific case, because some items, such as the principles of respect, integrity, communication, and excellence, could have fallen under either artifacts or the espoused values of an organization. Additionally, the model de-emphasizes the role of communication within developing culture. There were many communication failures within Enron that ended up leading to the demise of the organization. However, if it hadn't been one of the espoused values, we likely wouldn't have even talked about it utilizing Schein's 3-tiered model. And lastly, future studies should outline the role of communications in the study of organizational culture so that we can understand better how leadership communicates values and how the use of communication fits into the model of organizational communications. So thank you so much for your time today. I hope you enjoyed this discussion. If you'd like to continue this discussion, my contact information is below this video, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.